Then, with that, I call on the Prime Minister to open the case that stands in his name. Hear, hear.
All right. Can you hear me fine?
And indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. POIs in the chat, please. The structure of the case is simple. I'm first going to do some framing to explain exactly what is being debated here. Secondly, I'm going to do some analysis on how it is that pride arises and therefore what characteristics it has before going into two broad groups of impact. Firstly, on whether people are open and accepting of accountability for the actions they take, both from themselves and from others, and B, on why it is that people in a world with no pride are more willing to care for the reasons of others and for the needs of others as opposed to being selfish. Firstly, on framing, the thing I want to crucially note is that pride is not equivalent to validation. That is, we assess our actions and self-worth against a variety of different and incommensurable values. That is, when I take an action, I look at principles like justice, like altruism, like love, like the honing of a good life and the obligations I have to my family and to my friends. Crucially, in a world without pride, what it means then is that we can still be happy with who we are and what we have done, but rather the difference is whether this is something we take for granted, just merely by virtue of our actions having been our own, or if we reach this position after first having critically reflected on each of the decisions we take and on the impact we have had on the lives of others. On our side, we can still be satisfied and rest content with the way we have lived our lives, but we merely do so in a manner that is far more reflective than the one that pride engenders in individuals. Rather, there are two things that pride crucially does entail in individuals. The first is that pride stands for the prima facie acceptance for the things you do merely on the grounds that they're part of the story that you call your life. It advocates for you to commend the things you do merely because it was you who did them. It tells you that you're somehow in a privileged position in this world and that merely because you are who you are, you should advocate that everything you did was consistent even when it wasn't. The second effect of pride is that it advocates for the promotion of the self and of one's social group at the expense of other individuals. This looks like pride often being associated with like cultural and religious contexts, whereby you unreflectively accept and push for the thing which is arbitrarily yours, as opposed to the cultures and religions and ways of life of other individuals. I think that this distinction is crucial then because it highlights the unreasonable elements of pride that opposition does have to stand for. The claim from Moji is simple then. Pride is an emotion that stifles rational self-reflection and it prevents the agent from being acute and sensitive perceiver of the qualities that are relevant when you're a good judge of moral matters. It prevents you from becoming the best person you can be, and for these reasons, we're very happy to stand by a world where people don't feel pride. Next point then, how is it that pride arises? What makes pride unique is that it creates a sense in the individual that they're privileged and that they ought somehow consider their actions good from the start. There's a variety of mechanisms that demonstrates how people come to be proud and why it is that this is unique in pride. Primarily, I'm going to talk about four things here. Firstly, it comes from a lack of pushback to your characteristics and views, particularly early on in life. This looks like individuals, especially from the majority group, not having to contemplate that there are people who are not like them. This looks like white men, basically, in Western countries, not having to deal with the fact that black and brown people exist and that they are less privileged than you are. It looks like being able to treat yourself as the default and somehow embracing that. Secondly, it looks like a sense of entitlement coming from both the pushing coming from your parents, but also from the academic or like professional success that you're more likely to have compared to a minority. What this means then is that when you see yourself continually succeeding, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you're somehow entitled in life to these things and these goods. This therefore means that you build this in yourself over time. Thirdly, though, it just means that you are biased in favor of your own ego and your own goals. And the crucial bit of framing here is that this comes before the action. The difference is that even if you're happy with the things you do on our side, and even if you're going to be biased to some extent anyway, on their side, you develop this mental approach from very early on in life, thereby stifling your ability to critically reflect and learn as a result of the things you do. Fourthly, though, it's the case that you're basically in a position where you're making very agent-relative judgments compared to what you would be doing otherwise. That is, even if I am biased toward calling my own actions just compared to those of others, justice is a concept which is very easily universalizable from the perspective of the individual. That is, even if I think I am being judged, it's easy for me to cross-apply and understand when I should be thinking that somebody else has been just and fair as well. What is unique about pride is that it is highly subjective in that it only ever applies to my own actions, and I'm not able to understand or reflect or feel proud for the things others do unless I also take ownership of them. Essentially, then, this means that you end up with individuals, especially from majority groups, becoming far more selfish and far more harsh. Why is it then that the world without pride is going to be far more beneficial? Firstly, on the grounds of accountability, what happens then is that in the when you don't have pride anymore, you're far less likely to see criticisms of your actions as attacks on yourself and your ego and your legacy. That is, when you see yourself as a nuanced agent who reflects on individual actions, you're far more able to admit that sometimes you're wrong, that sometimes you change your mind, that sometimes you didn't do what is morally required of you. This means that you're both more likely to reflect on things as you do them because you worry that you might get it wrong, but also that you're more open to others raising such concerns with you. You're far more likely to help them when they tell you that you've hurt them. You're far more likely to realize that there is nothing that makes your position a priori more qualified or better than that of others. Importantly, then, this is going to have a massive effect on human history and society. This looks like individuals being more altruistic, being more acute to the harms they cause, and having fewer things like discrimination against others. PY from closing, please.
Yeah, so Chris, your case begins at an unproven comparative. So pride is currently a thing. Do you feel proud about everything about yourself? And why does pride subsume every decision you make as a human?
So I think in particular, there is a fine distinction between pride, both in terms of how pervasive it is for the analysis I give, and that it seems to apply to the majority of things proud people do. But also secondly, due to the analysis I give you, that pride comes before the things you end up doing. I can still be happy in reflection with the things I have done, but rather it's often the case that pride is unique, that it comes before the things that you then do after. I.e., you are first someone whose characteristic is that of a proud person, and then you do the thing that you add to your growing list of things you're proud about. It's not that you always or often even reflect on the things you do, and you're far more likely to be dismissive. The second group of impacts then is that you're far more likely to be receptive of the reasons for others. For the same reason that I told you that pride is very agent relative. In the absence of pride, you're far more likely to participate in the common humanity that you and others have. That is, when you see someone suffering, someone in pain, someone tells you you're impacting them, you're more likely to see this as a reason that you ought to act in their favor, as opposed to merely standing for your own values with no good reason to do so. For all these reasons, very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I call on the leader of the opposition to continue this debate. Here, here.
Hello, hello. PY is in the chat. So in the last debate, my mic was apparently pretty shy. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's quite good.
Very good. Let's start with counter framing. OG says that people can still be validated and content with the way that they live their lives because they find things like altruism and love important. There's a temporal problem here because the reason why you find those things important, as OG themselves put forward, is you did these things and that's why they matter. So they say that pride is a result of doing things and believing that those things matter. Presumably, you look back on your family that you've created with pride because you play a role in making your family a good one. So even things like altruism and love are dependent on pride as the validating factor for why you feel good about yourselves in the first place. Necessarily, Gav must defend a world where, I quote, you don't have a high opinion of yourself or of your importance, qualities, and actions. That means you aren't important, you aren't unique, your actions aren't special, many other people could have done them. This means that you're necessarily very unlikely to feel validation to the extent that they want, insofar as you believe that other people are as capable of achieving those things as you are, and therefore your actions are not that important. OG's burden is much higher than they are willing to take. They must defend a world without pride. Whereas on opposition, as CEO points out, pride is an emotion that can be tempered. So for instance, your sense of entitlement is often like tempered with nuances like, for instance, like education about privilege. The fact that there's often backlash against you when you believe that you're solely responsible for your actions. There's a lot of countervailing forces that means that you, at the very least, can feel some pride about your achievements, but there are ways in which this pride can be tempered to avoid the harms that OG talks about. But their main claim is one of accountability, that people just end up being more receptive to other people's points of view. But I suggest that that's not necessarily a good thing, insofar as a defense of your position is what creates discourse and debate. It's not necessarily bad to have discourse when you're staunchly defending your own point of view versus having no desire somebody who you view to be better than you or more authoritative than you, and because you have no pride of your own position, deferring to positions of authority and creating the exact kinds of harms that OG wants to talk about. So I think OG is already out of this debate. Two arguments, therefore. First argument on the individual. The base premise I have is that what people tend to do with the whole of their lives is not objectively meaningful. It is only meaningful when viewed through the lens of pride. Think about it. Like your achievements in general are meaningless in the grand scale of the universe. You're not going to be a Newton or a Galileo creating some kind of thing that like lasts through the ages. Often meaning in your life is artificially ascribed. The fact that you have a good job, a good family, these are all things that nobody else cares about except you. The problem here is that insofar as meaning is artificially ascribed, insofar as you believe that somebody else could have always done a better job and that your actions don't make a difference to many people and that you aren't that important in like the actions that you take, it's very unlikely that you will want to commit to those actions to begin with, insofar as they no longer give you the artificially ascribed meaning, because you're always able to objectively view that within the place of the universe. The problem here is that actions are iterative, right? You don't get to be a world-class scientist without all the small steps along the way. Iterative action requires constant reinforcement and motivation. It requires you, when you do your first dissertation, believe that dissertation is good, which is why you pursue your master's and your PhD in the first place. If you don't think that your actions are meaningful and intrinsically that you are not special, the likelihood that you can succeed is meaningfully diminished, insofar as you don't want to take those iterative steps to reach a point where your life is actually like able to affect others in a meaningful way. This means that lots of people opt out and live a life of malaise, which is one, collectively bad, because that means less inventions, less like good things that happen in the world. But also for the individual themselves, this is a fucking terrible way to exercise your agency, right? Insofar as you only have one like life that you can live, I think being able to experience more things because you're doing more things with your life is necessarily a good thing. The second thing is that it's often tied to self-confidence, right? People tend to see, even if you do certain actions and you like reach certain achievements, you often see your own achievements in comparison to others. But if this comparison doesn't come through the rose-tinted glass of viewing your own achievements as necessarily better, that's a bad thing. Because even if you do have some achievements, you always value them negatively against other people who have done better than you. So for objectively speaking, like breaking at Worlds is not the equivalence of making the Worlds finals, but I know plenty of people that equivocate the two, and I support that because the alternative is never feeling that you're good enough in comparison to other people and therefore giving up more early. So ultimately, I think this kind of like the ability to engage in healthy competition where you think that you can actually compete with other people who are objectively better than you ensures that one, like obviously this is societally beneficial for reasons I'll bring up later, but also it is individually beneficial because it ensures that you are not locked into societal power structures. Think about movements, for instance, that are built on people feeling that they do not deserve to be in the positions that they are in. Often it is pride in their own lives and their own communities that makes them want to want to engage in movements that fight power structures because they do not believe that they're any worse than other people around them. The societal implication is also a good thing because even if individually we can't achieve like many inventions, collectively with millions of people strive for like the maximum benefit, somebody is going to do some good thing that can affect millions of people. Before I move on to weigh that out, any from closing? Yeah, go ahead.
Is pride the only reason I'm here today?
Possibly. I mean, I think that there could be other reasons, but I think a lot of it is tied to pride, which is why we're all struggling here in the prep tournament. But anyway, let's move on then. So I think that ultimately, if like many people try, even if several of them fail, the fact that some people will reach the iterative process of becoming a world-class scientist creates huge positive externalities that help the world, right? So if you think about like the scale of human history, we first existed in an environment that is hostile towards human beings, and it is often human invention that has been broadly positive towards us having the quality of life that we have now. But the human invention comes with the degree that the reason why that there are often so many inventions, so people feel pride in their own work and want to iterate and do better as a result of that, often in competition with other individuals who are also inventing other things. That pride has created positive outcomes for the world. Often, the things that bring us the most pride are things that give positive value. When you see other people happy, when you see other people suffering less as a result of your inventions, that's why you feel the most pride. Which is why most people, when it comes to like inventing, for example, like do things that ultimately broadly benefit humanity as a whole. Without an overall sense of pride, a lot of these collective achievements go down the drain. Humanity progresses at a much slower rate, which is ultimately much more harmful for the world. For those reasons, stand on O.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I call the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debate. Hear, hear.
One second. Yeah, same drill. I'll take PY in the chat, please. I want to again be very clear about the definition in this debate, because what I think we just heard was a misrepresentation of the position coming out of open government. Importantly, it's not the case that the motion requires that we stand by that having a good opinion of yourself happens if and only if you're proud. That is, if you're convinced by my case, that is, that you're being happy for your actions inside opening government is a subset of you being happy for a wider category of things, this being human flourishing and well-being, this being the happiness of your community and the happiness of others. This is sufficient for me to convince you that you can still be happy in many cases without being proud. What the position have to stand by are the precise characteristics of pride, and an animalistic and primitive emotion that we possess that tells us to put ourselves ahead of others without warrant, that still unfortunately persists in the sake of the world today. The case I give you then is one that encompasses a variety of positions. I tell you why it is that you get a better society when people are less proud, but why it is that from a virtuous position, you merely develop into a better person. That is, you're someone who is far more acute to the well-being and suffering of others. You're someone who appreciates and balances these things as opposed to being needlessly self-centered in your own doings and your own behavior. For all these reasons, I'm very happy to be proposing this motion. Let's go through what we hear from opening opposition after that. The next thing we hear from Deon is this idea that you are more likely to defer to positions of authority if you're proud. However, note that this is only true insofar as the reason you respect people in positions of power is precisely because they have an unequal access to pride on the most part. Of course, opposition can point out that power discrepancies exist on both sides, but in particular, it's the fact that pride on the part of others comes with a form of intimidation toward opposition. That is, when you see someone who is proud and self-serving, you know that to try to criticize them is to face pushback and backlash on their part. The position coming from OG then is that that person is is both A, going to be more receptive to your criticism when you point out the ways in which what they're doing is wrong, but also B, that these hierarchies in the course of human history, given this is a prefers a world motion, are far less likely to arise, insofar as people are far more likely to be communitarian rather than do things like needlessly aggregated food and resources and power and authority that has led to this structured society that we exist in today and which has led to needless human suffering. Next up then, what are the mechanistic differences in a world without pride that wins us this debate from opening government? Firstly, as I point out, you get reduced inculcation of this specific selfish value in children by parents. This is crucial because compared to the other values, which sure may be fallible in some cases and which sure you may not apply perfectly, I explained to you why pride becomes part of who you are at a very early stage of life, which makes it very difficult to shake it off later on. What this means then is that even if a position is right and people aren't the best judges or the most well motivated, they have to stand by that you're far less likely to do the good and the right thing on their side of the house. The second mechanism is that you have a higher appreciation for things outside the self. There is nothing more egotistical than saying that the only way in which something can make you happy for your behavior or the behavior of others is if it relates to you. What I'm telling you then is that it is patently false for a position to state that pride is the only driving factor in terms of what makes you want to be human or to exist. For the vast majority of human existence, we have not had this form of capitalist mentality where it is only about the individual. Rather, for the majority of human society, we lived in communities. We lived for the sake of supporting others, for the sake of supporting our friends, our families, and for the sake of appreciating humanity. That is, it's of course the case that people have engaged in violent tragedies throughout history, but the position from opening government is that these have merely been the result of pride and of vain of individuals who we don't think would be acting in this way on our side of the house. This takes me into the third point then, which is that humans are no longer obsessed with legacy and success. The issue with opening opposition is that Deon puts the cart before the horse. Pride is not independent of your desire to do others, but it drives it. The reason that in the world as it exists currently, people push themselves to do things like invent or to succeed because they want to think they're better than others is precisely because they're addicted to pride. They chase it. It's the most addictive emotion you have access to, and you want more and more of it. In the absence of this, I think it is false to state that there would be nothing else that makes us human. That is, even from an evolutionary standpoint, for us to survive as a species, we presumably would have an alternative driver of emotion. But even then, I would point that the most likely alternative is precisely what I give you in open government. This is an appreciation of being human. This is an appreciation of the other good and beautiful things that we share with others. I want to note the implications here, and there are two kinds of groups. The first one is that you become the kind of person who acutely judges situations, and you discover and ascribe value to the individual qualities that make you human. That is, you're happy when you see justice, when you see beauty, when you see love. And there are two ways in which this is immediately better than the happiness you get from pride. The first one is that you understand that these things are not for you to have. These are not for you to have to the exclusion or to be gatekept from others, but they're shared and they're fundamentally human in what they are. Importantly then, this means that you're far more able to be happy with others. And this brings me to the second point, which is that you're far more able to derive happiness from the well-being of your community and from other human beings, rather than being needlessly obsessed with your own life and your own well-being. On our side of the house, people just tend to be far more happy when they don't feel the constant pressure to put themselves in a hierarchy compared to others. They see themselves as part of a wider state of being, that of being human, and they're far more likely to help others when they see them suffering. Closing, please.
Yeah, why is a hierarchy related to pride?
It's very simple then. The fact that you're trying to push your own interests and you see this as being to the exclusion of the interests of others, insofar as you know other proud people exist who are also unlikely to compromise with you, is a driving force for you to try to exclude them from positions of authority rather than try to reason and compromise and understand what it is that drives them. This is what leads to the vanity of many leaders in history. This is what leads to many of the tragedies and the lack of care of people suffering around the world. On our side, you get far more altruism and human well-being and the appreciation of human ends for what they are in themselves. What this therefore means then is that given that you already appreciate society and human existence and you want to help others, opposition is just wrong to say you no longer do things like invent or help. You're presumably merely driven by a different set of emotions, and you get this on both sides. Finally, on the idea of experiencing more things, I would posit that additional experiences are only good when they enrich your life. I have proof to you why it is that pride limits the experiences and the perspectives you can take while you exist. You become a more complete human being in the world that opening government stands for. Even if people are wrong sometimes, and even if it's the case that they don't do what is best all the time, we're far happier to stand by a world where people are more receptive and fairer to others. Very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I call on the deputy leader of the opposition to close out the top half of this debate. Hear, hear.
Well, I will take POIs in the chat. The worst myth in competitive debating is just because the CA set a motion, it must highlight a substantive disagreement, that there must be reasonable arguments for both sides. This debate is about whether we should remove the one thing keeping us from existential despair in a world that constantly attempts to remind us of our own insignificance. That one thing is pride. Pride that my contributions in my community are valuable, even if they are objectively quite small, that my family matters, even if it's only one household of billions, and that my goals are worth pursuing, even if the only thing they influence is one species on one planet in a universe so vast it defies comprehension. A life without pride, as it is precisely defined in the info slide, is one full of despair. Not metaphorical despair, but actual crippling and inescapable despair. CG asks whether the only reason you and I are here right now is because of pride, and DPM says that some other thing will motivate us in the absence of pride, presumably trying to imply that assigning such monumental importance to pride is unrealistic. It isn't. So I'm going to start by winning this debate by talking about that despair. Then I'm going to talk about how societies organize in the absence of pride, why that's bad. Opening government's characterization of pride is that it is different from validation. We agree with that. Where top half disagrees is on the outcome of this. So they say on the absence of pride, your validation has to come from self-reflection. We also agree with this. We think the difference is whether or not that self-reflection is going to be conductive to actual positive outcomes. What happens when the craftsman who is proud of his handiwork on our side of the house now asks whether good handiwork is actually important, or the businessman, or anyone doing anything, raising a family, and so on? And even if you occasionally feel validated on their side, despite the existential threat, because of human flourishing or happiness or whatever OG was trying to say, these things are highly unstable. Because the moment you get a bit more perspective and realize your own insignificance, or the moment something bad happens and you're no longer happy, it all goes to shit because there isn't that stable source of meaning that pride brings you. That delusion that says that I am important, that I am achieving great things, that the things that I've done in my life are sources of contentment for me, even if they are not objectively valuable in the big swing of things. And I think that means that on their side of the house, they do have to defend existential despair. It is not a reasonable argument to say that because we are talking about likely counterfactuals here, the world must not change very much. We're talking about a massive change, and we're talking about a change that will cripple people dead. Let's talk now about what motivation looks like in the absence of pride and how society is organized. The opening government claim, first off, is that pride is associated with self-promotion. But I think it's a bit unreasonable to say that other reasons to be selfish don't exist, right? So a lot of people are proud, for example, of their impact on others. So it seems like orthogonal to the debate of whether or not people are selfish or selfless, that's probably determined by other things other than pride, because pride can be directed in either selfish or selfless ways, as both teams acknowledge. Opening government then says that you're going to rest on your laurels and avoid self-criticism. I have a couple of responses to this argument. The first thing is that relying on self-criticism tends to be pretty ineffective. So it's not very important under either side of the house. And that's because it's hard to figure out that you are wrong. You need to be exposed to something that tells you that you are wrong. And people very rarely change their minds in particular regarding their own character, because it's hard to get information that tells you that you're wrong, because you surround yourself with yes men or echo chambers and so on. Instead, I think the most important mechanism in this debate towards towards self-improvement was the interpersonal relationships and external feedback that you got anyway on either side of the house. And then Deon flips this argument by saying that pride makes you protect the house that you've already built and makes you maintain good relations with your loved ones, to not fuck up your job and so on, because you are proud of those things and you don't want them to go to waste, and you don't want to be a terrible person that lets that happen. Moreover, delusion about our own abilities is a necessary condition for invention and other great contributions to society. I think about, and I'm going to butcher this name, Katalin Kariko, who invented the mRNA vaccine, one of two inventors, who was actually demoted from the tenure track at UPenn in 1995, that everyone was saying that her work on the mRNA vaccine was useless, partly because of sexism, partly just because they didn't buy the idea, but she pushed on anyway. That's not a rational thing to do when everyone tells you that like you're wrong about things and like you should change your behavior. But people do it anyway, and they do it because they have pride in their own work and they have this sense of delusion of themselves that says, I am important and the things that I can accomplish is meaningful. The game theoretic model, which Deon explains, and I'll just expand on to some extent, is that it is always irrational to believe that you as an individual will achieve something great. That's why other drivers, like opening government says, like beauty or something like that, can never work, because they can't drive us beyond what is rational. They will never give us the sense of delusion that we are important and that we should try achieving great things, even if the probability of us achieving them is incredibly low. To the individual, the cost-benefit trade-off is never worth it. For every Katalin Kariko, there are probably 1,000 other professors who were just like had their reputation thrown in the bin. But there's a huge positive externality when we do succeed of invention and contribution. So far, this proves that people will try to do great things. But why are these things likely good? And that's another clash I think that both have good arguments on. So our arguments are basically as follows. The arc of history shows that most invention tends to be relatively good, that bad inventions tend to be mitigated over time or regulated away, that most people are good and hence want good things and so direct their pride towards good goals. And thirdly, that things that are socially valued becomes points of pride as well. And yes, there are some things that are not very important that are also socially valued, like maybe debating or something, but most things that are socially valued for a good reason and consequently are actually very helpful and important to society. The opening government pushback to this is that it is hard to criticize good people. And I'm actually going to criticize proud people. And I'm actually going to agree with this. I don't think symmetry pushing everything is very helpful in a debate of this magnitude. The weighing of why it is better that people are impervious to criticism is simply to say that self-criticism was not that important anyway in changing people's behavior. What was important was the problem of hierarchy and evil that were probably going to be overdetermined. That on your side of the house, maybe like you're not as like you're immune to criticism, but you're immune to criticism under either side for the simple reason that you tend to isolate yourself from people who disagree with you, that you tend to lack empathy and so on. Evil people will exist on either side of the house. The flip of this argument is actually that the corrective to evil people requires pride. Activism requires pride. It was irrational for people to think that Stonewall was going to create change, but they did it anyway because they assigned themselves an important role in history. It is irrational for the students in encampments all over the world right now to believe that they are actually helping Palestine, but they do it anyway because they think that their individual delusion will become a collective good, and it is. That is crucially what we get on our side of the house. There are evil men on either side of the house. The thing that changes is whether people have the guts to oppose them. The final thing they say is on communitarianism. I would posit that communitarianism, if it does happen as a consequence of this motion, is bad because your incentives are misaligned towards free riding. You're unlikely to try to invent new things, create wealth for society, or help people. I would posit, moreover, that capitalist societies that emphasize the pride of the individual have been historically far more successful at alleviating poverty, that they've been far more successful in making people happy and making people feel fulfilled. Crucially, you avoid the existential despair and dread and poverty on our side of the house, and that is enough for a clean opening opposition win.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I call on the member of government to open up the back half of this debate. Hear. Oh, so sorry.
So,
I have to point of
am I
order.
clearly
Well,
audible?
you already just asked for us to say the point of order. Also, yeah, encourage all teams to take POIs, etc., etc. You know what to do. Please take them. They're good and cool.
Cool. A couple of things before I begin my speech. First, to all those of you who are comfortable doing so, can you please turn your cameras on? I think it makes the debate a whole lot more lively and fun and makes me not stare at a wall as much. Secondarily, I'll take a POI verbally. I cannot see the chat like at all, so please do not do that. Beginning my speech momentarily. General Iro once said, "Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame." I am proud to stand on side proposition. The first thing I will do is take opening opposition out of this debate, and then I'll forward one extension: why people will always seek meaning and why they find it far better when we are not prideful in and of ourselves. First, on opening opposition, they say life is meaningful because of pride. Here's the problem. This is entirely reliant on all the other emotions not making you feel fulfilled about your life. That is, the love you have for your family members not making you feel fulfilled. The love you have for your craft or your passion not making you fulfilled. And note they never fill in this analytical burden. Opening government has a similar comparative problem, which is when they never mechanize why pride is particularly harmful or bad. So top half at this point is kind of a wash. Secondarily, they say, pride motivates you, but motivation by a gun might be powerful, but it is not good. Note this is a different world. All these social narratives that prioritize pride do not exist on our side of the house because the emotion of pride never existed in the first place. But no, the media that pushes this narrative that says you are all wrong, that says you ought to have a high opinion of yourself, also doesn't exist because fucking nobody has a high opinion of themselves. Everybody is humble. Everybody is more kind to one another because they don't have any reason that means that they want to feel above other people. They have no incentive to do this in the first place, which flips their claim on kindness and also on innovation because you get way more fucking collaboration when you don't constantly shit on scientists you perceive as being worse than you and hold yourself in a higher opinion than them. But secondarily, not everyone is proud. The craftsmen can still be glad that they fed their family. Pride doesn't make you happy and feel valued for your woodwork. It makes you feel valued for your woodwork compared to other people. Pride means you always look on the outside. When you ask why should you be proud of your work, you ask what can you be proud of other than just choosing to enjoy woodworking for the sake of woodworking. Then they say activism requires pride. This is bullshit. You can know that you are going to fail and still try because of your love for the cause, because of your belief for that cause. The activists at Stonewall, many of them knew they were going to be crushed by an oppressive government, but chose to protest anyways because of their love for human rights and their love for queer people. This claim is out of the debate. Claim 1, people will always seek meaning, and pride is an impediment to that meaning. Why will people always seek out meaning on both sides of the house? And this will deal with the best case of OO. No other animal in the kingdoms that all exist commits suicide. We do this if we have no meaning in our life. People always seek out meaning for 3 reasons. 1, because it's an inherent evolutionary drive for us to self-actualize, not for us to feel as though we're better than other people, but to feel fulfilled in and of ourselves. 2, often spiritual beliefs. We believe in a particular religion or we believe in a particular God, which informs the way in which we act and gives our life meaning and purpose in this particular way. For most of human history, most people were religious, and these institutions probably exist on both sides of the house and give us a degree of meaning. But third, you seek out meaning, and that is because you don't want to live a life of existential despair. So you try to find people to fall in love with. You try to find passions to do. You fight and you fight to seek out this meaning. Note that pride actively stops you from being able to seek out this meaning. Why? 6 mechanisms. 1, it is an easy thing to latch onto. Our belief that we have reached the conception of the good life in the way we have a high opinion of ourselves often means that we do not see the other pathways forward. We do not reevaluate and self-reflect upon our life decisions. 2, pride often makes us much more difficult to deal with, i.e. when we have a high opinion of ourselves, when we're assholes because we value our own opinions and our own emotion quite highly, it is hard to get discourse and to talk to people about the way in which we are leading our life and the way in which we are being fulfilled. Third, pride often drowns out other emotions. We want to maintain our pride to avoid the shame of us not fulfilling our ego, so we do not reevaluate our emotions and our life to begin with. Fourth, pride is a false form of fulfillment because it is very fragile. The moment your high opinion of yourself is brought down, the moment you don't break at Euros, the moment something goes wrong, and know that statistically, given the amount of events in your life, it is likely that something will disprove your high opinion of yourself in this amount of pride you feel. You don't feel as though your life is worth anything. The pride you have built up on evaporates and it goes away. That is why the best scientists and the best chess players are the people who are able to be humble, to reflect upon their own weaknesses. That is why it is good to be Fabiano Caruana and bad to be Wei Yi. 6th, in having a high opinion of yourself, you necessarily feel bad when you do not meet this opinion, and your ego inflates when you do hit this high opinion. In the absence of pride, the other emotions that exist necessarily propel you to a similar extent. But 7th, pride is easily exploited, right? Even if pride is built up by internally determined values, they're knowable by other people, and this can be held against you form of shame. When you do badly in a particular exam, when you don't break at Euros, you fear the shit posts. You fear other people viewing you in a negative light because it hurts your ego and it hurts your pride. And that is often, that fear often stops you from seeking out the things that fulfill you in the first place. Before I go on opening.
All right. So the assumption that you make is that feeling love is equivalent to acting on that love. Pride makes people want to act because they think that their actions actually matter. The best scientists may have been humble, but they required pride to have taken the first step of action in the first place.
This is so stupid. I want to fall in love because the emotion of love is meaningful, because feeling love is something inherently valuable in and of itself. Emotions do not necessarily need to be linked to the pride you have. Like, it isn't that you want, like the absurd logical leap they make in OO is you want to feel good about yourself. That is pride. No, pride is the emotion of having a high opinion of yourself. This is not in the fucking motion. It is an assertion. It is unmechanized. This is the link that their entire case depends on. But lastly, emotion is very, very easy to appeal to. Pride often depends on external validation from those you perceive to be legitimate and to have a high opinion who are worthy of your respect. Meaning, it's like hedonic treadmill. You need to keep up your high opinion of yourself. And now this is often superficial. And insofar as the competition that you engage in likely only has one European champion, you'll be disappointed. What then is the fucking comparative? I will be very, very clear here. The comparative is curiosity. The comparative is love. The comparative is pride doesn't drown out your other emotions, and you feel as though your life is more meaningful because you aren't constantly having to reflect upon your own ego and your own opinion. What is the impact? One, we get all of the benefits of opening opposition without any of the deep degrees of shame and negative harm when we do not live up to the prideful narratives we hold internally on their side of the house. But secondarily, we get to fulfillment in a way faster time period because we don't have something that impedes our process and impedes our way to get to that meaning in the first place. I am so happy to win from side proposition and stand on behalf of General Iro. Vote CG.
Similar to... Oh, my phone is empty. This is very annoying. That is really great, thanks. I can also have a timer here, Arjun, it's okay. Sorry, let me get a timer, Chris, I'm really sorry.
No worries, plenty of time.
Yeah. Similar to Arjun, I can see both my screen and my timer. I would like people to also have their cameras on because I get anxious from speaking into a void. Okay. Can you hear me, Jack?
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Panel. When I was writing my thesis on meaning and morality, what makes humans unique, I found out at some point that the true unique thing was that while animals often go and find their quiet place to die, or when they're in extreme physical pain, might harm themselves, very few of them make the explicit choice to take their own life because they have decided that it's not worth it. Humans are the only species that have the agency and control over finding meaning from the moral determinations that they make from that life. They do so by asking themselves questions about what they value and what they find good, and why, therefore, their life is worth living. Pride is frequently one of the questions or one of the answers involved in answering those questions into what they think it is good. But the terrible thing about pride is that it is A, determined by external factors, and B, that it's often, and even if it's not determined by external factors, it is often forced outside by looking towards how you compare to other people in what you comparatively would be good at or what you comparatively can be proud of, which is also why other people can't or why other people shouldn't, and therefore why if you are not that thing, you should feel ashamed. The alternative is not no meaning. The alternative is that you take full control and agency over what you love and care and feel good about, and therefore you make that thing to give meaning without the shame, without the easy exploitability and manipulation you give other people the moment that you allow yourself for shame or you allow other people to take that control over you. The examples of that are love or curiosity or even hedonism or altruism or just complete selfishness or art or caring for horses or scrolling days on Pinterest. For all I care, but the key thing here is that you will feel happier the moment that it's more true to yourself, more internal, more valid, less easily exploitable, and therefore it makes you more happy. Very proud to win this on government. What am I going to do in this speech? The first thing is the very easy part and just throwing the CO extension out, which is saying that pride makes you do, between brackets, good things for society. I'm going to give them the credit and say that they might prove that they do some good things, but their entire extension is just they do things for society. The second thing is then to make the comparative with top half, on why Chris's extension is reliant on the part where pride makes you care for other people, and opening opposition case is relying on a part where you cannot find other forms of meaning. And I think we prove both burdens are either wrong or that we can, or that the impact is better. Go. Let's start with CO. CO's extension is essentially this. Pride is good because pride makes you focus on society and drives you to do good things for that society. This is wrong for two reasons. The first is that pride can be according to both OO and OG, can be entirely internal and to yourself choice on what you want to have that pride on, compared to then how you value yourself towards other people. So you can feel pride according to OO because you are a woodworker and you want to be a really good woodworker. But I suppose for that same reason, you can feel really proud because your internal self-moral system thinks that it is proud of you the moment when you have bigger balls than someone else, or the moment you can beat something harder than someone else. And I'm entirely unsure why that makes you a better or more valuable member of society. You can feel really proud when you can run around your house really, really fast. And I'm not sure why that has any form of contribution to the social world or the world around us. Because for every example that Chris gives that pride can be negative, CO can give one where pride can be positive. But I think in the end, it's uneven. And the real problem here is that usually you can also feel shame in opposite of it. So I don't see that there's any impact. Let's go towards opening half and a whip. Chris's extension is reliant on that pride makes you not care for other people, and that without pride, you do care for other people. I'm not sure this is true for the way that we give our extension, and thereby also beat OO in saying there's other forms of meaning we can do, which is the following. I think pride doesn't necessarily mean you have to the absence of pride doesn't have to mean you don't care for or that you do care for other people. I think the absence of pride can also mean that you find meaning in very simple things, like being curious about old ways in which the Roman Empire functioned, which isn't necessarily something that you do or share with other people. I'm not here because I felt proud about how good I'm debating. I'm here because I enjoy talking to Arjun, and this makes me a little bit happier about my Saturday, and that is enough to feel that my life is fulfilled and meaningful because I like spending time with friends. Why then does Arjun prove that love is so much better the moment that pride is so much better the moment that it's not in the world? For a couple reasons. The first one being, I lost my time margin, how far am I? The first one being, the absence of pride means that you're not as easily exploitable. That means that humans are unique in their search for meaning, and therefore pride often comes in. But pride means that when you want to be that good woodworker that OO describes, you also have to ask yourself, why am I proud of being this woodworker? And that means you have to go and look external. And ask yourself, why is this woodworker being something good? That means you have to ask yourself why other people are not that good, or why you think that this should be valued comparative towards other people. What that means is that the moment that you determine for yourself that being a good woodworker is something you can be, say, proud of, to stay with that example, that also means that when you're not a good woodworker, you shouldn't be proud and you're shameful. I'm sure that OO is correct and that gives you a good drive to start and do more woodworking, but it also allows for a lot of other people, like Arjun explains to you, to say, hold it against you the moment that you're not, or to do really bad things, or to be less self-reflective the moment that you're not good at that woodworking anymore, or to really force the idea that woodworking is the only good thing that happens. The alternative, I think, is a lot better. It gives you more agency, makes you just happier as a person overall and live a better life. That is to say, you do the woodworking not because you are proud of it or because it's better and then therefore because it's more righteous or better than other people, but because you simply just enjoy it, you love it, or you're more curious about the wood itself. Go on, OO.
You say that inventions are possible in the absence of pride because of feelings like altruism. But I only jump from feelings to actions if I irrationally believe that my personal actions will make a unique and substantive difference.
No, I disagree with that. I go to this debate tournament because I enjoy it, not because I think it will make a difference to the debate. Like, panel, this is entirely stupid what OO says, that I need a driver because I need to believe I'm making a difference. I'm not sure what kind of ego-tripping person you need to be in order to go and do things because you just think that it can make a difference. But a lot of times I do things because they feel good. I don't shower myself or when you're proud, you shower because you feel better about yourself and you think it makes you a good person. When you're not proud, you shower because a shower is nice and you don't want to smell bad because it hurts your nose and it is not a funny anything to feel. I still think that all these actions can exist. The comparative here that Arjun explains is that on our side, they don't come with malicious incentives, they don't come with comparative incentives towards other people, and they don't come with any form of negative emotions or feelings that you have towards yourself or towards others. They come from genuine and inherent things that make your life better. The reason that this wins is because it's not dependent on anything or any other action in the world happening other than you just feeling better about yourself, and therefore the world being better because everyone feels better about themselves. I think that's the only concrete impact in this debate that really stands, and therefore I'm really happy to be closing government.